but I'm going to go ahead and give it a start. Okay, we are reviewing ORM part 2. I'm sorry, part 1. Haha, tonight's part 2. All right, multi-select. Which of these are required to configure your Spring project to connect to a database? Yeah, great job. So you need the username, the host, the port, the password, and the schema name in the applications.properties file to set the configuration so that it knows where to find your database. The table names are defined by the classes, the entities. So that's, not that part doesn't come till later. All right. Using environmental variables keeps your database configuration secrets from being made public on GitHub. True. Yep. 100%. If you haven't done it, go do it. It doesn't take long and it's worth it. Okay, quiz. Multi-select. Which of these are specifically used for object relational mapping to bridge a Java app with a MySQL database? Yeah, okay, so Spring Boot is the framework that we're using for our Java app, and Gradle is the build tool that works in tandem with that. But we were using that long before we started working with databases, right? So the two things that have to do specifically with object relational mapping are the Java Persistence API, or JPA, and Hibernate, which is what, actually wires things up by looking at the classes and then is able to form up the tables in the database according to the way that the models are defined. Okay, good. Minestrone in the lead. True or false? With the ORM technique, a repository class is set up as a data layer which inherits from the CRUD repository class. So that's false, and it's a trick question because repositories and CRUD repository are interfaces and not classes. So if you remember, we talked to, yeah, I know. Yeah, you're probably all mad at me now. But this is an important distinction because when you set them up, you have to set them up as interfaces. So I just want to see if anybody caught that. 3 of you did. Okay, Marcus in the lead. Which of the following is not one of the methods provided by CRUD repository? Good. Yeah. Yeah. Add doesn't exist in that particular interface. It's save is how we take an object and add it to the database. Okay. And it's Stony back in the lead. All right. True or false? CRUD repositories parameters are the entity class the repository will store and the autobox type of the primary key. That is true. Yep. In that image, you can see that artwork is the class. That's the entity of things that are being stored in the artwork repository, and integer is the wrapper class for integers, which corresponds to the primary key being an integer. Good. Lantern in the lead. In a controller, when a repository object is created, which annotation should it be given? Good, yeah, auto-wired. So the key here is in the controller. If you are in the controller and you're setting up that object, that is, it will actually make the object from a class it creates on the fly from the interface of the repository. That is, you set it as auto-wired, and that tells it just do your magic and go and wire it all up behind the scenes. And then it's able to connect everything across all your files. Good. Okay. True or false? With ORM, an entity class is a persistent class, a model for a table in a database. Yep, that's true. Last question, multi-select. Which annotations should be applied to the field in a class that is used as a primary key in the database table? Good. Yep. ID and generated value. So just to recap what entity and repository do, entity is to be set on the class, the entire class, to say this entire model should be correspond to a table in the database. Repository is put on the repository in that interface that you create. Okay. See who won. Jim Papadopoulos in third place, Root in second place, and Marcus in first place. Good job, Marcus. All right, Minestrone and Matt W for the runners-up. Okay, and I once again failed to put my window underneath the Zoom stuff, so hang on. All right. We stopped sharing here for a minute, so Colin can give announcements.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carrie. I don't have too much today. We are having some extra work time during studio today. So I would like everyone to, of course, take advantage of access to TAs and having somebody to bounce their ideas off of. Really start pushing for assignment stuff. We have 2 weeks from today until the deadline for Unit 2. Not to freak people out too much, but just saying that this is crunch time, and yeah, plan accordingly. And you can, if you have any questions about deadline, feel free to reach out to me. And additionally, look for a survey next week. I've been speaking with Magdalene about liftoff and how it's going to, I keep saying liftoff, it should be Unit 3. I'll be speaking with Magdalene about Unit 3 as y'all transition into that, and we're gonna have some surveys available to fill out for application ideas and also group placement preferences. So definitely keep an eye on announcements next week for a survey to fill out, which will be mandatory for Unit 3. Those are all the announcements I have. Thank you, Carrie.
Great. Thanks, Colin. Okay. Let's see. Let's get up here again. All right. Tonight we are going into part 2 of object relational mapping. We'll have the lecture, and then for studio, as Colin said, there's no actual studio assignment for tonight. It's designated as a time for you to have access to your peers and your TAs for getting caught up on things or working on your graded assignment. Just friendly reminder that you can't share your code with anyone other than your TAs. But you can talk in general concepts with your peers about the things that you're trying to figure out for your graded assignment. That's totally cool. Okay, so yeah, as Colin said, that deadline for everything is in 2 weeks from tonight, the 30th. But tonight, you're going to have what you need to do parts 1 through 3. And when we get to the end of lecture, I'm going to kind of walk you through that for just a second. So again, call for art. If you have not sent me art and you want to, it's not too late. I can add it in. So just keep that in mind. I do have 5 people that have sent stuff in, so that's exciting. And in fact, before I really get into talking through all of these slides with bullet points and things, I want to bring you up to speed to kind of where we are with our example project, so that you have some context for where it is we're going tonight. So I'm going to show you, let's start here. Okay. So I have all this different artwork in here. You can see now our artworks table has a lot more information. We've got titles, artist, year created, media, style, and images. And these are links. So like you can click on them and see people's art, which is super fun. And they're set to go to outside tabs. So, you can kind of open them, and there's some really great stuff in here. We've got people with a lot of different backgrounds and interests and styles, and I'm really excited about everything I've seen. So this is super fun. That's by Pigeon. And then let's see, we got some photography down here. Yeah, man, I would love to see that in person. Northern Lights. Okay, and yeah, we got let's see, this one, I think this one's titled Chance the Rapper. Yeah, so we got some fun stuff in here. I'm going to make the folder that has all of these images, because I basically set these up on my Google Drive, and I pulled the IDs from them so that I could link to them. I will make that folder available. There'll be a link in the slide so that you guys can go and look at these images anytime you want. And I also have the CSV file that corresponds to all this data, so that if you want to clone this project down, and or if you're just got your own already set up to code through it, you can always pull this data in for test data if you would like. But everything still works. We've got a couple extra fields in here now that we've got media and image ID, things like that. You'll notice that artist is still just a string, right? But what I have done is I have created a class and a repository and controller and some pages, some views, templates to go along with the artists. And so I also have the artists in here. They're just not connected yet to the artworks in any real way in the database. That's what we're focusing on tonight, is setting those relationships. But I went ahead and got all this set up. I added, our artist in, and I have the forms to add them and delete them. So that's all. Basically just modeled that exactly off of what I had done for the artworks. So that part is all pretty straightforward. You're welcome to come into the code and kind of look at all of these controllers and, repositories and models and the different templates down in here to kind of see how I've done everything. But if we come into the database, you can kind of see that we've got, let's see, in the artworks, we have these artists again listed just as plain text, right? So our goal is to get to the point where we have two tables that actually are related by a foreign key. And so actually we would have that ID here instead. That's what we want to work toward. For now, style is still just based on that enum that we had set up. If we do this, what my plan is to do this next class on Monday, where we actually try to demonstrate what a many-to-many relationship looks like, since some artworks can have multiple styles. And certainly there's going to be a lot of different artworks of the same style. So we will, but that's something we're going to discuss in the second half of chapter 18 in the next class for part 3. So for now, we're just going with that enum. But yeah, it's kind of getting there. I have other things that I'd like to add here. I've got dimensions on the art piece. I've got descriptions, but it's not important for tonight. I wanted to keep it a little simpler. So let's, you can kind of see, the artist is just the first name, last name, and location for now. So that's, this is kind of how everything's set up for now. I've got a bunch of to-dos in here so we can code through it as we discuss different aspects of it. So let's go ahead and go back to the slides and jump into this. So we're going to just talk about the difference of between inheritance type relationships and association relationships, which is what we're focusing on. And then we'll do the many-to-one side of things and then the one-to-many side of things. And then I'm going to talk about this optional class, because you have to use an optional in certain circumstances when you're retrieving something by an ID from the database. So I'm going to kind of discuss that and demonstrate how to use it. So optional is just a built-in class with Java. Okay, so let's talk about these relationships. Inheritance is something we've talked about many times before, both with JavaScript and Java. The idea is, I got a typo. One class is based on another class. So you have a base class, and then you pass down, through inheritance, these other properties. So they're deriving them from that superclass. And you can kind of see in each of these, I have this kind of grayed out to represent this ID is something that each of these tables will be inheriting from abstract entity. So, and then all the other properties are ones that are unique to them. So this is the idea of inheritance. You are familiar with this, but it is a different way of talking about relationships than association. Association is where you have completely different classes that are just associated with each other through, one property or more. And so we've been talking about these different relationships. Tonight is one-to-many and many-to-one. Next class, we'll talk about one-to-one and many-to-many. And I discussed this a little bit previously when we were working on some of the stuff in the database, but you can kind of see I've updated this because ultimately I'd like to move toward having a list of styles on the artwork class to relate many-to-many to the styles. But something you may notice that's different from the way that we were doing things in the database is that for the Java side of things, when we're looking at these as Java classes, for each one of these here, where in the database we had set these up like, we're just going to connect to the ID, the primary key of each of these tables here with a detail ID, artist ID, style ID. It's different in Java because Java is interested in the type. And so we're saying we have details that are an instance of artwork details, and an artist that's an instance of artist. We're not going to set up artwork details tonight. We'll do that as an example for one-to-one next class. And then style will be a many-to-many. And if we have time, I'm going to try to work in exhibit as another example of a, one-to-many, many-to-one. Yeah, so the key here is that you can see that for artists, there is a list of, for this artwork table that has a relationship to artist. Over in the artist table, you can see there's a list of artworks. Same thing here, style has a list of artworks, exhibit has a list of artworks, and you're probably wondering, well, why do you have to add that if you already have them connected? Because in Java, things are only, just because one has knowledge of the other does not mean that it automatically reciprocates like it does in MySQL. In the database, all it needs is that foreign key, and the database has what it needs to relate them completely. But with Java, we have to do a little bit of extra work if we want to help them keep track of each other. So we'll be adding, you'll see how we'll be adding this on as part of this process. Does anybody have any questions about that before I get into the relationships themselves?
Hi, Carrie. Can you please go previous slide? I just want to look the.
Here?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so that's the difference between inheritance and association. So now, yeah, in our example, there's one more bullet point here. In our example, artwork is the many and artist is the one. When we talk about many and one, because you would say, if you just kind of use common vernacular, you would say an artist has many artworks. One artist has many artworks. So artist is the one, artwork is the many. So just keep that in mind as I'm discussing the difference between when I refer to something as being the many versus something being the one. Just keep that in mind. Okay. So many to one is what we're going to start with. And to set the relationship in Java, you want to go to the model for the many class. So we're talking about artwork in our example. You would either add, or if you already have a field that you're just replacing, update the field to have the type of the one class. So instead of having a string that's just, an artist with the first and last names as a single string, we actually say, okay, I want, to have an instance of an artist class, and that would now be the type. And then you add this many to one annotation that helps Hibernate know what the relationship is when it's setting up the tables. So that's key, that's important. If you're replacing an existing field from previously, you're going to need to update the constructor and setter as well. Otherwise, you'd have to add, it to the constructor and setter. So we can do this. There is more to this though. So then it's not just the model. You also have to make changes depending on how you're going to use it. I'll preface it and say that there's lots of different ways to use it. Tonight, I'm going to demonstrate using it similar to the way the coding events thing was done, where you'll be able to actually have, ultimately, once we get both relationships set, you'll be able to filter the list of artworks by artist. That's kind of the direction we're heading. But the very first thing to do is to make it possible in the controller to have access. The artists in this case are one repository is the artist repository, and then pass that down to add, because the form needs to be able now, instead of you typing in some sort of string value, you need to actually select something from the invariable artist, right? So we'll pass that down through the controller, and then over in the add form, we will switch out what was previously just a regular text input and actually use a select with options that runs through each of the artists that are being passed in from the controller and list those. So this is very much the way we've done with our style enum, where it's just going to create that list automatically from the data. But this time it's coming from data in the database via this repository, the artist repository, by calling find all. So let's set up that side of things, just making it possible to associate it in the first place with the artwork when you're creating an artwork. So we'll head over here. and check out our to-dos. Now I've gone to the to-do panel down here because I've got so many of them, and I marked them as number 1 or number 2, depending on which one of these we're doing, just to keep it all straight, because there's a lot going on here. Okay, so we have, let's see, oh no, I want to go to the model first. Let's go to the artwork model. Yeah, okay. So the very first thing to do, as we said on the previous slide, was to change this artist field here to no longer be a string, but to be associated with our artist class over here that has a first name, a last name, and a location. So all I have to really do here is just say artist and set that, but then I have to, of course, go and update things elsewhere. So we have here, that has to be changed from string to artist. And down here, same thing, we got to set it here. And then I'm going to actually take these off as I'm going because they'll narrow down what we're doing elsewhere. Okay. But we have a couple more instructions here. We also want to remove size because we're not worried about that. It's no longer a text input field. Instead, we need to actually add something for hibernate, which is, I'm about to type hibernate, many to 1. And that basically says that this particular class artwork has a many to 1 relationship with artist. We have many artworks for one artist. And then the last thing is that we want to truncate a table in the database before we restart app, but we don't need to do that until we finish working on the controller and the view. So I'm going to hold that there, and we're going to switch over, but it looks like I've still got an issue somewhere. It's yelling at me. Yes, I didn't fix my getter, so let me do that. Yep, okay. So now everything is no longer string, it's all an artist. So artwork now is, has this association from its side. It's aware of artist. So we'll go over and update the controller so that we can update the form. So go to the artwork controller, and first thing we need to do is tap into the artist table in database through this repository. So we're going to set this up the same way that we did the artwork repository up here. We'll use the auto wired annotation and then just set up artist repository. And now it's available for us to use. And we can go down to here, yes, to the add. So this is the add form for artwork. And we want, no longer to see, I got to get back over the artworks section. Yeah, we don't want to see this string field anymore. So we're going to pass this list of artists down. So we can say model.add attributes, and we'll just say artists. And then we'll say artwork, no, artist repository, find all. And it'll just return that entire list of artists from the database and assign it to this variable artist that we'll be able to use in the view in the add form here. So that's the next part, is to come over to here. And actually right here where we have the artist, we don't need the error message anymore because we took off the validation. And we also need to switch out this text input. I'm just going to borrow from what we've done down here with the style because the structure is the same. We just need to change out the names. So here where we have artist, the field can stay the same, artwork.artist. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're taking that out. So this needs to be artwork.artist for the select, so that the entire input, that dropdown, is going to be associated with the artist field of the artwork class. That's what this does. Now, what this does is taps into the artist list that we passed down that comes from the artist table in the database so that we can list all the possible options. So the value is going to be artist.id, because now that this has its own class, it's not just a string, it's actually, we have an ID number that should stand for that value. And then of course, text is what we want to display. This example, of course, was from our enum. For this, I can just put artist. And the reason for that, you would think, well, don't we want to concatenate the first name and last name? And I can say yes, if I didn't already have this set up, because I put a custom toString method in our artist class that actually goes ahead and does that for us. So I can just put artist, and it's going to implicitly, I can kind of put a note here, implicitly calls toString. We've seen this before. It's just the first time we've seen it in this context. Oh, it doesn't like it when you put it in the middle of a tag. So let me take that out and put it here. Okay. Yeah, okay. For TH text, let me be real specific because there's a lot going on there. Okay, so did everybody follow that? Does anybody have any questions about what I just did there? Mina?
Carrie, can you explain the to-do number 1 part again?
This?
Yes.
So the idea here is to change the input that we see over here on the page from being a text input to being a drop down, like the way that this one works, but it'll list the name of the artists. So we passed in the controller, we passed down the list of artists here by tapping into the artist repository. And now on the form itself, we're saying, okay, let's loop through those artists, display them one at a time. And then each one of those gets the value of the ID number, and it's going to display the first name and last name via the implicit toString from the artist class. That help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, so that part's done. And I think I had, I'm gonna clean up these to-dos here, just like I would in real practice once they're done. Okay, so other than truncating the table so that it can generate these fields, I mean, I can actually go ahead and start and restart the app, and it's going to recognize these relationships, and we'll be able to go over the table and update it and then see that we have it. So let me switch over to artwork here. This is the one we changed, and let me rerun this query so that we get the whole structure. Okay, so now we see two things. We see the artists that already were saved with this, right? But we also see this new column over here, artist ID, which was set up by Hibernate because it recognized the relationship, the many-to-one relationship. So now it's saying, okay, we've got this thing over here, and it actually sets it as a foreign key. You can't tell that from here, but it is. So we aren't going to need this any longer, and we could do this in 2 steps if we wanted to. We could like edit this to where, oh, hey, yeah, by the way, you can sort on things by clicking on things in here. So we're not going to need this anymore, but I want to be able to, I'm just going to do it all at once. Like I could alter the table to remove this column, and then I could actually truncate the table, which truncating and dropping are 2 different things. Truncate means keep the table, keep the structure, all the columns in place, but just get rid of the data that's stored in it. But I can do both the alter and the truncate at the same time by just dropping the table, because Hibernate's just going to recreate it for me. So if I drop it entirely, let's see if it lets me. All right, if I run this, it does not. Okay. Well, we may need to do this in 2 steps. When you're working with foreign keys, sometimes it can get a little fussy. Okay, so try that one more time. Drop now. Yeah, I took it out. I don't know why I didn't do it the first time. Okay, maybe I didn't click the right button. So yeah, so we can see that that table is gone. So if I come over here and I just restart this, Hibernate will go through the whole, the JPA checks everything, Hibernate checks the class, they figure it all out. And now if we come over to here and I refresh this, we can see we've got that artwork table back. And now I'm going to close this. If we come back in here and, look at this table now, you can see that we've got the artist ID, but we no longer have the artist column because it completely based it on, it started from scratch. And you're going, oh no, but you lost all that data. And I'm going to go, yeah, it's okay. Because I actually can import it because I made a CSV file. So let me come over here and actually, and hold on, let me think about this. Is this going to work? Yes. Okay. I can actually come in here and get this new one, which has now we have artist values here that are based on the artist IDs and no longer those strings that are the names. So these will correspond to the numbers that I currently have in my thing. And of course, if you guys decide to borrow all this file and you have the artist set up with different ID numbers, you'll have to edit this before you bring it in so that they all match. But everything should match up. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And there's an error. What's the problem? Media specified twice. Oh, fun. Okay, it's going to be dumb. I've done something wrong, but I'm not sure what it is.
Carrie, it looks like it's trying to map the image ID field to artists there.
Oh, sure enough.
Could that be it?
Oh, you know what? It's because, okay, I know why. Okay, bear with me for a second. All right, so I'm going to show you what I'm working with. Yes, I forgot that. So this is important. I'm really glad this happened, actually. This is where, if you're importing into the database, you have to use the database names, not what's in your Java class. So in my Java class, the field is called artist, but the table is expecting it to be artist ID. It's also putting it last. So I'm going to move this so that's not confused. There we go. Okay. So this should work. Come here, download, download, comma separated values. And then bear with me for a second. Actually, I'll just use it. It's fine as is. Instead of renaming it. All right, so we can come back here and start over. Import wizard. And this time I just need to grab this most recent one. And yeah, now everything lines up like it's supposed to. Okay, cool. 25 records imported. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so that's important, actually, that you make sure that if you're going to import data, that you're using the names of your columns match what's in the database and not what's in Java. Okay, so I can refresh this and we now have all of our stuff back. So if I come back over here and go to the artworks page, we now see we have everything again, and we have the artist names. It looks on the surface just like it did before. But the difference is that we're generating this from the artist ID through the artist class, through the artist repository. And now they all correspond directly. So the next part is, well, what if we want to be able to look at all the art that's just by one artist? We would love to be able to, like, for instance, from the list of artists, to be able to have something to click on that says, okay, just go show me all the artwork from just this artist. And then it would take us back to this page, but use a query parameter up here like this to say, like, artist ID equals, 1 or something. Now, if I do this, we're going to get an error. Yeah, it's just going to go back to here because we don't actually have this set up yet. This query parameter, the ability to for us to do this and submit it this way. So let's go to the next part and talk through how the one-to-many side of things works so that we can set this reciprocal relationship so that now the artist class is going to be aware of whatever artworks are associated with its artist. Okay. Needed some water. Okay. So one-to-many, now we're talking about the artist side of things. So we'd want to go into our artist class in this case, in the one side of things, and actually add a field that is a list of whatever type of things the many is, right? In this case, it's artwork. And then you're going to add the reciprocal annotation, one-to-many. But it takes a parameter, in this case, this parameter mapped by, because it needs to know what is the field that's in that other class that corresponds. And in this case, of course, we know it's artist. So basically, you're just going to, set that on there, make sure it has this value for the mapped by attribute there. And then you don't update the constructor because and you can add a getter, but not a setter. And the reason for those two things is because Hibernate works with the table. Because, okay, let me see if I can explain this. The database, I mentioned this earlier, the database does not need to have an artworks column in the artist table, because it's already aware of artists and artworks, like they're aware of each other in MySQL, in the database. So we're just doing this so that we can actually access things this way, but it's through the repository. So all we have to do is set this on it, and everything else will be taken care of for us. And all we have to do is tap into the repository for it. So we're going to set this up, and then we're going to look in the database and say, oh, is there an artworks column now? And there's not going to be. But Java requires this because Java needs to have like explicit knowledge of artworks. Okay, so we will do that. And then over in the controller, we're going to achieve what I just talked about, we're going to add that query param to our handler. Somebody have a question? Everybody check your mics. Okay, so yeah, so we are going to set that query parameter up and make sure that we are able to accept that artist ID so that we can narrow things down and filter on it. And then we're going to have to add some logic to determine whether, when something's coming in, should it display a full or a partial list. And remember, this query parameter is going to be optional. We're going to make it, we're going to use, you've seen this before, we're going to use that thing where you say, oh, it's down here, required equals false, right? To make it possible for this handler to accept it or not accept it and still be able to present you with something in the view. So we'll have to have a little bit of logic and say, is this artist ID there or not? And then when we go over to the actual index page, we want to add that link I was talking about to the artist table. So we can say, hey, let's use this link to add that query parameter on and go look at their artwork and their artwork only. And make it real easy for us to transition that, because you don't want to have to, you're not going to expect your user to type in the query parameter into the address bar. So we'll just add the link to each row, and that way it'll link over to the artworks page to list just the ones for that artist. Now there's one very important thing here that's missing, and that's all this logic that I talked about, right? The reason for that is because that's where this optional class comes in. Yeah, let's talk about it. I'll talk about it first, and then we'll go and we'll code everything, and I will just talk through it again. Okay, so when you are working with data and finding something by an ID, you're giving the database a piece of information to look up. You can't just receive the data back directly. So this CRUD repository method, find by ID, actually returns that result from the database as a container, and it's something that is part of the optional class in Java. And part of that's because the result could hold an object that corresponds to the ID, but it also could be empty because the ID doesn't exist, or there's no object corresponding to that ID. There could be reasons why you might not be able to get something back. And you need to be able to handle that. But the result is returned. So you can use that container to prevent errors and handle whichever situation it is using your logic. If something is there, great, let's go over and, use it. If it's not there, let's do something different instead. But as far as the user's concerned, nothing's broken. So there's a lot more information about this optional class at this link, which you can go to. We can go to now. Yeah, this is the documentation for the optional class. So you can kind of see there's these different methods here. I'm going to talk about a couple of them in a second here. So that's the why. That's the reason why we actually use this class to wrap the result or there's no result and pass that back through the repository. So this optional class, the way that we want to use it in the handler, after we bring in the artist, if the artist ID is used, we want to have some sort of variable just to store that optional object, because we have to have that in order to retrieve what's inside it, or to check to see if there's something inside it. More importantly, we got to do that first. So we can do that by having, something result is a common thing to use. It's fine. You can use whatever you want, but it's fine. That's the result that comes back from the repository when you're using find by ID and giving it a specific ID. So you have that result, and then you can actually use one of these methods, is present or is empty, depending on how you want to set your logic up, to tell whether there's actually something there or not for that ID. And then if it is present, you can, say, okay, let's go get it. So you can then set your artist, which is what you wanted all along. I want to know what artist belongs to this ID, and get that object using .get on the result. So it's just a two-step process. First, you go and you get the result, get that optional object from the artist class, and then you can unpackage it once you confirm that it's there. And then you can, of course, pass that down and say that I want my list of artworks now to be just the artworks that are associated with that artist, and not all of the artworks from the artworks repository. But otherwise, we can actually just say, okay, sure, just go ahead and have all the artworks from the artwork repository, because we're not trying to filter on any particular artist. So there's a couple layers of logic here, and we'll code this all out and talk about it again kind of as we're going through. But that's the idea behind optional, just so you know when we get there. All right, so let's go actually switch over here. Let's go do all of this. We're going to back up to the artist class. And the very first thing to do here is to add the list of artworks like we talked about, so that Java can track, track that entire list of any artworks that are associated with this artist. And it creates the reciprocal of the relationship. So this will be a private list of artworks. Looks like I didn't get my list in there. Oh yeah, that's the one. Okay. And we'll just call it artworks. And we'll just initialize it to an empty array list. That's fine. In the past, when you've done things like this, you've had to have methods in place to manually add things to your array lists, right? But we don't have to do that. All we have to do is create it, and then, Hibernate sets it all up, and it just flows from there. So it'll all happen behind the scenes. It's magical. It's wonderful. Okay. So we want to add this annotation. In this case, we're doing the one-to-many because we're in the one class. And this is the one where we actually have to give it mapped by, if I can spell it right. And of course, we know that in our other class, if we go back over to the artwork class, this is the one that has the many-to-one tag on it, artist, right? So that's what we're mapping by. So if we come back over here to the other class and say one-to-many, we're mapping it by artist. So this is what links those two things together. I think that takes care of this. Yep. But we do need to go down and add a getter. So we'll do that. All right, so that returns the artworks, which is, what we're going to need if we're going to go get the list in order to just display those artworks. So clean that up a little bit. Okay, let's look at our to-dos again. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the controller, and we're going to update this handler to accept that query parameter, which we're going to call artist ID. So I can actually come right in here, and remember that with query parameters, the annotation you use is request param. And then we're going to give it a type. And you might ask me why am I using capital I integer instead of int, lowercase int? The reason for that is because we are going to need to check and see whether the ID is null or not. And with the lowercase int type, there's no such thing as null. And so that you'll have errors. The only way to check if it's null or not is to actually tap into the wrapper class integer. So we'll be able to actually check and see if artist ID is null because we have wrapped it with that auto boxing there. Okay, so yes, so now we can do our logic. Oh, I did say that this needed to be optional. I got to read my own instructions. So I want to remember here that I need to make this required equals false. And that way it won't break when we try to display just all of the artworks without using that query parameter. Okay, so now let's do this logic. All right, so here we go. So we're going to first check, is there a request parameter or not, right? That's kind of the first thing we want to do. So this artist ID, if it's not null, then we want to, that means that there's an artist ID and we're meant to filter. So we're going to have to do, use the optional class, make that request and then pull something out if it's there, and all of that. And then we can return, instead of returning artworks as all of this, we can just return it from the artist class from that list we created. So I'm going to add an else here, and we're just going to kind of move this up into here because we're basically just saying, either there's an artist ID and we need to filter the results, or we're just going to do what we've always done before and return the entire thing from the artwork repository. So now that we have this kind of the logic in place for the outer layer, let's look at this logic that we need for what happens if there is no actual corresponding artworks no corresponding artist for the artist ID. Okay. So first we, there we go. We're going to return, there we go. We're going to return an optional that will hold an artist object if it exists. And then we're going to go tap into the artist repository, use find by ID, and give it that artist ID now that we know that it exists in this portion of the logic. And now we can check and see, okay, so now that we've got it, let's peek inside and see if there's actually something there that we can work with. So if result is present, then let's actually define what this artist is. And we'll just do that result.get. So, oops, there we go. So this is something that's part of that optional class. Once you have that object, you can just call get on it and it will open it up and unbox it and retrieve it for you. And you can store it right here in the artist of type artist. And now that you have that, you can pass in the list of works from the artist. So I'm just going to say, I want all the artworks in this case to be artist.get artworks. Okay, so again, if we have an artist ID and if this result comes back with a valid artist for that ID, then we pull that out of the box, get that artist, And now we pass down the artworks that just belong to the artist. And that's that getter that's from our artist class that we set up right here for that new list of artworks that we created. So that's going to pass a completely different list of artworks down that just belongs to that artist instead of passing the entire list. That makes sense? Okay, so the last thing to do then, of course, is to make it possible for us to easily generate a way to get to these filtered results. So we're going to come over to the artist index page where the table is for the artist page. And let me slip over here so you know what we're talking about. Yeah, so we're talking about this table. Just have the first name, a last name, and a location. But we want to say, okay, for each of these artists, let's add a link that says, you know, take a look at just the artworks for this artist. So I'm going to just have an empty table header there. I don't really feel the need to have a header. And then here, I'm going to actually change this to, well, I'm going to use a TD. I need a cell, right? But inside of it, I'm going to just put a link. And I'm going to use THRF here. And I think I might have a mistake in my, do I have a mistake? Yeah, I'm gonna, okay. So I'm gonna use this variable expression that lets me just give it something like the only, I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate. You may remember in the context of using THRF in the past, we used it with that other syntax here that was specifically for like tapping into resources that might be in the resources, the static resources folder. That's not actually what I'm doing here. I actually do want to just have a link, but I need to concatenate it and I need to use a variable to do that. So instead, I'm going to use this type of expression so that I can just concatenate. And that's going to give me /artworks and artist ID. So I'm starting to build this, you know, query here, query parameter. Yeah, and then I'll just concatenate that with artist.id. And then I just need to close that out. And I'm going to say view artworks. And so we should have one of these for every single one of the artists as it's looping through with this th each loop. So let's restart this and see where we are. Okay. Let me refresh it. There we go. So we have these links, view artworks. If I click on this one, you can see up here, I have artist ID = 1. So we correctly concatenated that together. And I've got just the artwork for Andy. Really cool stuff, Andy. Look at this. Made this out of bricks with a wet saw and a drill. Super cool. Okay. And yeah, so we've got just that. And of course, if I go back to the artist page and do it with a different artist, here we go. We've got some really cool sketches. I'm fond of this one. Super juicy burger. Okay, so this is great. This is all working. Let's take a look at now, you know, what's happening with the database. So if I come back over here to the artist database and rerun this, there is, as I mentioned before, there is absolutely no column here called artworks because things aren't stored that way in a database. You don't store lists of things. You have a single unique piece of data for each, you know, position in a column and in a row. So instead, it's, you know, it's using the fact that in here, it's got those foreign keys. It already knows how to relate them. It can go and look them up for you. And the way that we told it to do that is just by setting this one-to-many on here and mapping it back to the many-to-one that belongs in the artwork class. And this is it. We just had to kind of set it up and give it a place to start. And then it's able to retrieve that anytime we want to go see what are the artworks. It's going to go to the database and it's going to fill this list for us. All right, does anybody have any questions about that part? Yeah, this can, be a little bit complex. I think the scariest thing to me when I was first learning about this is how much I didn't understand about what was going on behind the scenes. Because it's like, okay, you just kind of throw an annotation here and throw this little thing here. How the heck is it doing all of this? Because every time I've ever done this before, I've had to like put in a bunch of logic myself and, do a bunch of legwork but hibernate, magical, wonderful. So everything is wired up. It knows what to do when you set these annotations on and you relate everything. And then it can, make those connections for you and make it really easy in your controller to, just actually, accept a parameter and make it possible to have either all of the artworks or some of the artworks. We can do this in different ways. And of course, you can imagine that you could get a lot more detailed if you wanted to have, additional ways to filter things. So I think, let me check my to-do list here. I think I just didn't clean them up. Yeah. Yeah, I just didn't clean them up. Okay. So, yeah, so that's that. All right. So we have we're getting there. We've got an artist list, artwork list. We've got an artist list. We have a way to relate them together. When we add artworks, we are now, picking from the artists that are currently available in the database. And that's it. So we're going to work toward having some additional types of relationships. This is getting long. It can get even longer with additional fields if we choose to, like description and things like that. So that's where we may want to do a one-to-one relationship and separate out some of these details into a separate table and just relate them. And then of course, styles, we are going to take a stab at doing a many-to-many relationship. We'll do that in the next class. Grant, you have a question?
Yeah, so right now we are picking from what's already in the database. Is there a way, is it I'm just like not specifically how to do it, but is it a lot of legwork to make it so you could enter a new entry as well as select from what's already there?
Okay, so let's yes, because we have that over here. We have this add artist right here, this form. So I could come over here and I could put my own name. Sure. And now
That's where the disconnect was. I don't know.
Well, I added a lot of this stuff in between classes, and so you haven't really seen all of this. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's good to demonstrate this. So it's like, yeah, now I can come over here. I've added the artist. So when I go to the artworks page and then I go up to add art in this form, now I see my name because every time this page loads, it queries the database to get the most current list.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So then from there, I can, so like when you guys are working on your grade assignment, hint, hint, and you're working with all these, jobs and employers and, all the different categories of things. Yeah, that's the idea, is that if you need something to be available for something else, then you create that thing first. Like you can't set up a job unless you know what employer it is. And if you want the employer to be available in the list, you're going to have to add the employer first. For example, like that would be the kind of the flow of that. Okay, so let's talk about Studio because there is no Studio. There is Studio. It's not a Studio assignment. So you're going to do in graded assignment 4, and I failed to open this up. But essentially, you can look at the instructions. Oh, they're right here. I have links for myself, go figure. Okay, so yes, so just parts 1, 2, and 3 are what you now know how to do as of tonight's class. There's a lot to part 2 there. Yeah, there you go. And part 3. So Part 4 down here is setting up a many-to-many relationship. That's what we're going to talk about in the next class. So you now have what you need in order to set up, you know, a bunch of this stuff. And then you can make those employer and skill classes persistent. You can establish one-to-many relationships between some of your classes. So you can go ahead and work on that or other things if you need to, you know, catch up on some things or meet with your one of your TAs to do a demo of another assignment. Whatever you guys need to do, make good use of the time while you've got your TAs and each other tonight. And then in the next coming down the pike, these are our last 3 lectures, guys. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, so ORM part 3, and then authentication, and then we'll talk a little bit about REST, like having RESTful APIs, for example. And that's going to be important for leading into Unit 3 for you to do your capstone project. So that's all she wrote. You guys can head off now and do your thing. And there is obviously no, since there's no studio assignment, there's not going to be any sort of studio review tonight. So the only video I'll be putting up will be this lecture. And if you do have any questions about anything, you know, continue just to hit me up in that lecture questions channel. And I'm excited about where we're headed with this. We're gonna, you know, kind of round it out on Monday and then go from there. So you guys have a great night, and I will see you on Monday.